Okay, so hello, welcome back to another Unity tutorial. A lot of games that you guys play probably have developer consoles so that you can press a key on the keyboard and it pops up a text input. You input your text and it allows you to do things such as spawning in items, changing scenes, whatever you want it to do. I'm going to be teaching you guys today how to build one, as you can see in the background right now. We're going to be making this, it's going to be on GitHub. I'm actually going to put it on my Dapper tools package in a few days, but you'll be able to get this actual tutorial project right away after this video. Let's get into it. The video is going to be split up into 5 parts. Part 1, where I show you how to set up and what packages to install. Step 2, the logic for actually processing commands and calling them. Step 3, connecting the UI so we can actually enter text on screen and then have that call the commands from the logic we wrote in Step 2. Step 4, let's actually make some commands. And then finally, Step 5, the bonus step, in case you guys want to stick around for this. I'll be writing some unit tests and showing you how easy it is to build on top of this with tests to make sure the code works. If you ever edit it in the future, you can always make sure without having to manually test that it's not broken. Okay, let's get into it. So step 1 should be pretty simple. Just make sure you've got these packages installed. You need the input system, the test framework if you want to do the testing. If you don't, then you don't actually need this. TextMesh Pro for the UI, and then Unity UI also for the UI. Once you've got those packages installed, it might ask you to do a restart if you're importing the input system to make sure it's enabled. But once that's done, you should be ready for step 2. If you want to use the same folder structure as me, you can just follow my namespace, or you can go look in GitHub down below. So I've gone in the scripts folder, then /utilities, /developer console, and then /commands for this folder. We're going to set up what a console command is first. So no matter what console command it is, it's always going to have a command word, which is the words to actually trigger the command. So we'll call it command word. And it'll be a string, and it's a getter. So we can only get the string, we can never change it at runtime, we don't want to set the word. And then we want to actually be able to process a command that returns a boolean based on whether the command was processed or not. So for example, let's say you do a give command and you want to say give and then the item name, but what if they just do /give and then no item name? You return false because it wasn't a valid input of arguments. So we say bool process, like so, and then we take in a string array of arguments. So that array of arguments could be the item name, ID, quantity, maybe a mixture of the few. That's why it's an array, is because it could be any number of arguments. So we pass it through as an array and we call it args for arguments, okay? That's what happens with a console command. Now that was just the interface for the console command, and the only reason I'm actually using an interface is so that when we do unit testing, if you want to, it's very easy to be able to make a mock of the class. Now that might be a bit advanced for you guys, so to be honest, you can actually skip out the interface step if you want to. So everywhere I use an interface, you can actually just use the console command class, but I'd recommend doing it anyway. It doesn't cause any more complexity really, it just makes it easier to unit test. In this console command, we now need to implement the interface. Let's do that. Okay, so it wants a command word. We're going to get that passed in via a field in the inspector. So we'll make a serialized field, private string. Okay, and it's going to be the command word, like so. And I'll just default it to string.empty. And then here, all we want to do is we want to return with the getter the command word. Okay, this is happy now. We just need to write some logic for process. And all we're actually going to do is pass that down actually to the classes that inherit from us. We are the base console command class. We don't have any logic for how commands actually work because the commands can do anything. So we're just going to say, to make the interface happy, this is going to be abstract, meaning we're not implementing it, but our child classes will implement it. And then because of that, you don't need any body. You can get rid of the squiggly brackets. We just need this. This is our console command implementation, and then we can inherit this and override this process function to do whatever we want with the arguments. Okay, let's go ahead to the next script. So next we have the developer console, which is where the bulk of the logic will be. This is just going to be a normal class that will be nested inside a mono behavior, so that through the mono behavior we can actually pass input events and all that stuff, but all the non-Unity specific stuff should go here. This is what we'll end up unit testing when we do that. We're just separating out the logic from Unity, from mono behaviors to just normal classes like this. So make sure it's not inheriting anything, okay? We're going to want some things passed in through the constructor. So let's make a constructor, so it's a public developer console. And we're going to pass through the prefix. The console wants to know what is the prefix for your command. Now, to be honest, you might not even want a prefix, but maybe your chat in your game allows commands, right? Maybe your developer console is actually just a chat that allows commands. So you want commands to be run, just like in Discord, for example, when you do a prefix for a bot. So we're still going to do it this way. We'll pass in a prefix, like so. And we want to pass in the commands. The developer console needs to know what commands are valid, right? And it's up to us to pass those in through here. Now, all we need to do with these commands is just enumerate over them. We just need to simply go through them and check, is this the right one, process it, is this the right one, process it. So we don't need a list or an array. I'm going to be using an IEnumerable here, though a list or an array would work too. But I'm basically saying, I don't care if it's a list or an array, just as long as I can enumerate over it, then it's fine. And what is it that's going to be in this enumerable? It's going to be the thing we just made, which is the iConsole command. Okay, and we'll just call it commands, like so. And then we need to actually store those in here. So let's make some read-only fields. So private read-only string prefix and private read-only IEnumerable. I could have copied and pasted here to speed this up probably. Console command, commands. Okay. And then all we need to do here is just set them. So I'll say this dot prefix is equal to prefix. The reason I use this dot is to differentiate between prefix here and prefix here. Equally, you could call them different names, but I've gone ahead with the same name. I'm just using this dot to say set the one in this class to the one coming in. Okay. And then commands equals commands. So we're going to need a method here. It returns nothing for processing our command, and it's going to take in the command input, which is actually the command word itself. We've stripped off the prefix at this point. We'll get to that in a minute though. I've written this function first because the other function relies on this one, so we're going to work backwards in that sense. What we want to do is with the word, which might be give, let's say the command is give, this string would be the word give, and then args would be, as I said, the arguments like the item name or ID. We're going to say go through all of the commands that exist, all the commands that we've registered, and we'll say if it doesn't match the one we're checking, go to the next one. Continue in a loop means go to the next thing in the loop. So, let's say we've got two commands. The first one is like change scene, and the next one is give. Well, if we've done give is not the same as change scene, so it means, don't process it, just go to the next command. And then if we do give and it does match give, then we'll do it. And, then we'll do it here. The reason I use this equals is because it's an easy way of making sure that regardless of case sensitivity, that they match. Now, if you don't want that, maybe you want them to be case sensitive, then you would change this around. It's up to you to modify it how you want, but this is the way I want to do it. And then once we've actually said, no, this does equal it, so we've done /give and a give command exists, then we want to process it here. And the process method, as you remember, is where we put the logic for our command, which we will get to when we make some example commands. But yeah, this is it. And as soon as we've processed, so process is true once it's been processed, successfully anyway, then we return, meaning don't process any other commands. Now, you might want two commands with the same name and stuff like that to both happen, but I don't see a case where that's, going to be useful. So I just return, and that makes life easier. Now I've made another method with the same name. It's up to you if you want to use the same name. I'm using it here because they do the same thing, but it's like in a different step. I could have actually just put all this over in this method instead of this command, but I felt like splitting it out. So this command just takes in one string, which is the entire input value. So this is what's going to get passed in from the UI. When you type /give iron sword, then that's what's going to come in here. Like that's what the string is going to be, /give iron sword. So let's go through this. We first of all check if it starts with the prefix, so our prefix /. If it does not start with a prefix, then return. Okay, simply don't process the command if they didn't put a prefix. Just treat it like it's normal text and go away. Go maybe send it in a chat or something. It's up to you. And then we actually want to get the input value, which is the rest of the string without the prefix, basically. So we're going to say remove from this string starting at index 0, so starting at the beginning of the string, get rid of the length of the prefix, that many characters. So if the prefix is 2 characters, get rid of the first 2 characters, which at the end of the day will remove the first 2 characters. It will remove the prefix. So by this line, by line 25, all you're left with is the command word and then the arguments. So we're going to split this at the space. So every space in our command, every empty space, is actually going to be split up. So now we've got an array of all our words. So if it's give iron sword 10, you'll get give as the first element, iron, and then so on, right? Every word is a separate element in the array. And we say, well, the first word, so index 0, is always the command word. So give or, teleport or whatever it is, right? The first word is always the command word. And then arguments is everything else. So we say, from this, skip the first element, skip one element. So essentially get from 1 to the end. And then that returns an IEnumerable, but, we're storing it as arrays. So let's just to array, okay? So now we've got these two different things. We've got a string, which is our word, give, and a string array, arguments, which is everything afterwards, which could be empty, but, sometimes it will, sometimes it won't be. But you'll always have a string and a string array, and that goes to get fed into our command we wrote earlier. So finally, for the logic, we have the developer console behavior, which will actually nest a developer console. So all the logic is inside there. This just does the higher level stuff inside Unity. It's a mono behavior. This is where we pass in the prefix and commands coming in from Unity itself in the inspector. We also want to reference some UI because at the end of the day, you know, the console command thing is a UI. We're going to have the UI canvas we want to turn on and off, and the input field we want to read input from, and we want to reset it whenever you do a command. We want it to clear, okay? So we have a float for the pause timescale, and the reason I do this is because when you use your console commands, you probably want the game to be paused, and if you pause the game when you're normally playing, it'll go from a timescale of 1, which is unpaused, to a timescale of 0, which is paused. But what if you use a console when you're already on a menu? Well then, what'll happen is you'll go from timescale of 0 to a timescale of 0. You want to go back to a timescale of 0, not 1. So you can't really hard code say, when you close this, go back to 1, because you might actually go back to 0. So I store the pause timescale here, okay? Then we have a static developer console behavior, which is this thing. Now, I don't really like using singletons, but the reason I want to store a static instance of this is because at the end of the day, there's only going to be one developer console running at once. There's never a reason to have two. And eventually, when we put it in a scene and then go to another scene, we don't want to have to remember to put it in every scene or, you know, destroy it and spawn it in every scene. If it already exists, if we, you know, start on one scene with a console and we go to a new scene, it should just get rid of that console. We'll use that in a second when we make the awake function. And then over here, this is the logic. I've used it in one of my previous videos if you've seen, but basically we store a developer console, but also we have a getter. This is the one we actually use. So whenever we try and get the developer console, we say, well, if it's not null, then get us it because it already exists. But if it is null, then actually make a new one. And there are other ways to do this, and this kind of isn't necessary for what we're doing. It's just the pattern I like to use. So yeah, some people will say, you know, it's not necessary. You could actually just make a new instance on the start method or the awake method. It's up to you. This is the way I like to do it. So if you're following along, then you can go with this or do what you want. So for the awake method, which gets called when this object first exists in the scene, we're actually going to do the singleton check. So we're basically saying, if there is already an instance of this class and it's not us, well then we shouldn't be here, so get rid of us, okay? But if this isn't the case, then it means we are now the instance. We are the first instance of the console behavior, well, the developer console behavior. So we will be the instance, and we'll call this don't destroy and load, which just means that when we change scenes, we don't go away, we stay. And if we go to a scene, as I said, with another console, developer console, then what will happen is it'll run this, and it'll realize the instance already exists because the one from the previous scene still exists. So we'll just destroy ourselves there. So this makes sure there's always only one of the developer consoles, okay? So for mine, I'm going to actually be using the new input system, though you can quite easily swap this out to use the old one if you don't want to. So this line here is what would change. I say, take in the context, which is the context of the input. You'll get that in a minute when we go into Unity and set up the UI. But essentially I say, if the context wasn't triggered, because imagine if I set the spacebar to be the key for this, for example, this function will be called every time spacebar is pressed, held, released, so on. So I want to say only if it was triggered do I want to actually, well, sorry, yeah, if it's not triggered, then return. If it is triggered, then do this. Now, triggered means different things in the new input system based on what you set up in the actual controls, which we'll get to in a second. So my trigger condition is that I press it down. I don't want to also call this on release, because what will happen is if you tap the button, it'll open and close in one frame, or well, not even one frame, just when you tap and release. Now, if you have any like red underlines because you don't get what this is, just do Control-Enter and it'll add it for you. It'll set all this stuff up here with the usings. Equally, you can go look on GitHub, it's okay. Okay, but once we know that we've pressed the button to toggle this, we just basically say if we already are open, then essentially go back to the pause timescale and close. Otherwise, cache the current timescale, pause the game, turn on the UI, and activate the input field, which means get it ready to type. Because otherwise what we have to do is we always have to open the command window, go down to the text input, click, but you'd like it so that whenever you open it, it already is selected. It's quite nice, okay? So this is just for opening and closing. And then finally, process command, which is going to be called by the UI. When we finish editing the string for the command word, so it's when we press enter or click off it or whatever, when it ends, then we're going to call this, we're going to say developer console with capital D, so we get the getter, which then runs this. Developer console, process command. We pass in our string, And then once it's done, we just empty the input field, because otherwise you have to manually clear it every time, which isn't expected. Usually in like any text editor, any messaging app or anything like that, whenever you send a message, it clears your input. It's not like you can just keep pressing enter to send it again. Okay, that's actually it for the logic. So the next thing to go do is set up the UI and the input. So for step 3, we're going to be setting up the input and linking the UI. So the first thing to do is to create, if you're using the input actions with me, to create a new input actions. I'm going to call it controls. And inside here, we have one action map for developer, one action, which is to toggle the console. And the key is, I think it's called the tilde key, correct me if I'm wrong, using the keyboard and mouse scheme. So just set up a scheme, which I think it forces you to do right away anyway. So I'm on keyboard and mouse. It looks like this when you set it up. I've said keyboard and mouse is for keyboard and mouse, okay? And on that key, just make sure it's a button, and then the actual key, you want to make sure it's press only, so that it only triggers on press only, okay? Make sure you save it. If we look back in the code actually, this is what it means to trigger it, right? So it's only going to return true and continue if it's pressed down, not when it's released, and not when it's held or anything like that. Once you've got that set up, make a game object to be the root for your developer console. Now, if you go to my GitHub, you can get the UI I made. I'm not going to sit here and make the UI, but I'll show you quickly what it looks like. You might have already seen it at the start of the video. It has a dark background, just a black thing with the alpha around 200. And then at the bottom, we have an input field I made stretch the screen. Set up some things on here. You can go read those from GitHub. Okay, and then eventually we've got a placeholder and the text. And then this is actually on the input field where we want to link things up. Okay, I'll show you that in a second. So over here, make sure the root has a developer console behavior. We want to say the prefix is / or whatever you want. And the commands we actually need to make, so that's going to be empty for now. The UI canvas is over here, let's drag it in. And the input field is over here, drag it in. Set this to the UI layer, doesn't actually matter too much, and then we'll save. Now over here, the player input component comes from the new input system. So if you're using the old input system and you just, in your code over here, you can say, if input.getKeyDown, you do it your own way, okay? It's up to you. We want to say down here to invoke Unity events and make sure you've dragged in your input actions asset. Then when you've done all that, on events, there'll be an event for your different mappings. We have the developer mapping, and we have something called toggle console. So for toggle console, we want to call on our class the toggle method, okay? And that's this function, and it'll pass through the toggle context like so. And now this will all work. When we actually press that key, whatever you set it up as in your controls thing, then it'll actually toggle this. Now make sure your UI is disabled by default, okay? But if I press play now, I should be able to actually press the key and have it open and pause the game, and press the key again, and have it go away and close, okay? So that's what we've got right now. All we need to do is make some commands and actually be able to test them. Okay, so for this video, we're going to have two simple commands. We're going to have a log command, which just debug logs whatever you say after the command word. And then we're going to make a gravity command to be able to change the gravity value. So we'll do the easier one first, which is the log command. It's a scriptable object. The console command is a scriptable object, so therefore this is. And then because we want to be able to create an instance of it, we have to add the create asset menu. We're going to set the file name to be new log command and the menu name to be the path. So utilities, developer console, commands, log command. Okay, so in the process step we're going to write the logic, okay? Now we don't even care what args is really. We definitely do. Args is actually going to be the thing we log. So args is an array of strings, okay? We want to bring it together as one string and just say that in the console. So we're going to say string log text, okay? The log text is going to be string.join. We want to join an array of strings, but we want to pass in a separator, so we're going to join with spaces, okay? So between every element in here, we're going to connect it with spaces, which essentially just makes it look like how the user put it in originally. And then we're going to debug log it, so debug.log the log text, okay? And then return true to let it know this was successful, okay? Now the way you set this up, just so you know for future reference when you make your own commands, is you can go anywhere in your project. So for example, I've got a game data folder with utilities and console commands. You want to make a new instance, so create new utilities command. You'll have log command, and then we'll have gravity command in a minute. Once you've made a new log command, it'll look like this. You rename it to be what you want. I'm going with this naming scheme of utility, console command, log command. And then you just type in your log word. It's as simple as that. So whatever you want the command word to be, give, log, teleport, change scene or something. Just make sure if you're doing 2-word things like change scene, make it 1 word. You probably could, you can if you want, change the actual system to work with multiple command words at the start, but it's a bit harder to get that to work. So I thought I'd go simple and just keep it one word, okay? Now what this actually allows you to do is make multiple instances of the scriptable object with different words, so you can actually have the same command run, the same logic for different command words. Equally, we could set up a system where commands have a list of valid words, which would make more sense. But for now, we've got the log command here, and it's called log, okay? If we go back to the console, we have a list of commands. Let's drag in our log command. So if I save this and press play and bring up the console, what we expect is I do the key / log and then some text like this. I press enter and you notice it logs it in the console. Pretty cool. And then this clears and we're done. So we can now go and do log again. So do log hi, log goodbye. Okay, so that works. Let's go make the other command. So the gravity command's the same. It just inherits console command. It's called gravity command. And create asset menu is just replacing the word log with gravity, really. Okay. You can see this if you want to, but as I said, it's the same with log changed for gravity. The logic's a bit different though. For gravity, we want some input. We actually want to know what they want the gravity to become. So we want one argument and one argument exactly, which is going to be the value of the gravity. So we'll say, well, if args, okay, dot length does not equal 1, then clearly it's not right. We only want one argument and one argument only. So we return false. If it's more or less, then that's not good. We want exactly 1. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is, because this is always a string coming in, we want to make sure it's actually a float. We want to make sure it can be a float. So we need to try parsing it. That's what parsing is. So we're going to say we want to float parse it. So if we can't float parse or try parse, what we're trying to parse, we're trying to parse arg0. If we can't parse arg0, and then we actually need to output this, so we can say out float value. Okay, so we pass in a string, which is here, and we get out a float value, but this is saying if not. If we fail to parse it, then we want to return false, okay? Otherwise, it was successfully parsed, so they did actually enter a valid float. So we're going to say physics.gravity is equal to, now you can't actually change individual parts of it, you have to change it in one go. So we're going to say it's equal to a new vector 3, where the x is the current x of gravity, so physics.gravity.x. The y is our value they've just done, because gravity is usually up and down, so that's the y-axis. And then the third value is physics.gravity.z, or .z. And then we'll end with return true, because if we get to this part, it means, yep, it was handled correctly, okay? Let's go test that. As I said earlier, if you go to somewhere in your project, preferably where you've put your other commands, you just make a new instance of the gravity command, okay? And then you got it here, call it gravity or whatever, go over to developer console and add it to the list, okay? So you can quite easily, when you're editing, actually remove commands that maybe are broken or whatever. You can just add what you want. And if you save it to a prefab, then when you chuck it into a new scene or go to a new scene or whatever, it's all working. Let's go try messing with the gravity. So as you see, the cube falls. We then do gravity 9.81 instead of minus 9.81. So we're effectively flipping the gravity. We then close the window and unpause, and then the cube floats up. And then now if I do /gravity minus 9.81, and then I just wait a second, it's going to come back down to the ground. Here it is. And there you go. So we've actually created console commands now, so you can actually use this when the game is built. Because normally when the game's built, you can't, for example, edit gravity. Now, your game might not have use for editing gravity. These are purely just examples. You can do whatever you want now. All you need to do is just make more commands that inherit console command, make sure you can create an instance of them, and write whatever logic you want, accessing the arguments they passed in to make sure, you know, that they put in what you want. So we could actually, if we had an inventory system, make a give command, as I said, that would look up and try and find an item with that name or that ID, and, you know, that would take a bit longer to do, but it would be really useful, and that's what a lot of games have. So I hope you like this video. Feel free to let me know how it was down below. If you like the video, please leave a like and subscribe, share it with friends. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time, and goodbye. I'd like to end off the video by thanking my patrons, the people who help make this content possible, with special thanks to Josh Folsom, Beard or Die, Dustin Miller, Francisco Diaz, Rek, Yoris Letta, Hades Zorko, Rene, and Marie Baldwin. If anyone else is able to help support the channel monetarily, link to my Patreon is down below. There are also links down below to other social media, such as Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. It would help me out greatly if you could go follow those. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.